on the earth. For also fear not either day or night, cease sleep with the time. Then I beheld all the work of God, that a man not find what is happening that is done under the sun, because the man works and works and works to seek for that. He will not find it. Yes, farther away, doesn't matter if a wise man thinks about it. No. Cannot find it. Now Solomon, if you remember, is looking at the limits. He sees wisdom has good value. Wisdom is nice. Wisdom is fine. But under the sun, what happens? The sun continues without rain that God provides, and you see dry ground. You know, long ago, when God judged Israel, and the Romans went ahead and kicked out Israel about AD 70, the people who lived there did not control the farm area, and it became a desert. Up until 1948, nearly 2,000 years, right when he set up the state of Israel. When I went and I entered college as an engineer, I met a man whose name was Gil. And Gil's last name was Shalit. Okay? He was an Israeli man. And every day he had the little cap, same as the Israeli culture. He would show up at the engineering department. And Gil, he was a short man there. He studied about water. How do you remove the salt from the water? How do you go ahead and become pure water to provide for the farm area? Now, why was he there studying for his PhD? Why? Because his government was paying him. And then he told me, you see the desert that's there? It's becoming farm. Because we will provide the water that's necessary to grow the things, the trees, the plants, the food in the desert. Now God's word promises in the Old Testament that Israel, after their punishment, will become the same as flowers that bloom in the desert. Now if you fly to Israel, to the areas that were desert before, that were neglected and not cared for, now today it has become beautiful grass plains, trees, plants there, farm areas. Because what has happened is the people see, wow, we need to care and use wisdom and technology for controlling the land that's there. Solomon is struggling. And it tells in verse 16, he can't sleep all day. He can't sleep all night. Okay? What should I do? I see I'm the king, I'm not satisfied. I'm the foolish person, I'm not satisfied. I'm the worker, I'm not satisfied. I have 1,000 women, I'm not satisfied. There's no satisfaction. So he's struggling in his heart, and he's going back and forth. I can't sleep all night. I can't sleep all day, because I think on the one side, I have enjoyment that God gives me. On the side over here, I have the judgment of God in the future. I don't want there, and this does not satisfy me. Apart from God. And he really arrives at the place that's the same as the man in the Old Testament whose name was Job. If you remember Job's story, remember God gave him to suffer. And in the end of the book, Job, who's been arguing with God up until now, you remember, not fair, not right, I'm innocent, arguing with God. At the last, God shows him this list of 60 questions. It's the final test for his college degree, okay? So these 60 questions, there's 40 in a section and 20 in a section, but altogether 60 questions God gives him. And Job tells him, I don't know, I can't answer. And you remember, Job humbles himself and he admits, your wisdom is too deep. Your wisdom is too far for me. I am small and you are big, God. You remember that, right? Solomon arrives at this place here in verse 17 and he tells, You see, I beheld, I looked and I looked and looked, all the works of God's hands, that a man, he can't figure it out, what God is working and doing under the sun. I don't know. Solomon is the wisest, best man in the world. And Jesus Christ told, from Solomon up until now, there's no more wise man. Now, wise man did show up. His name was Jesus Christ, okay? So don't misunderstand me. Jesus Christ passes Solomon's wisdom. Solomon admits, I'm the same as the nerd with his computer. Okay? And I have my glasses, and I have my pocket protector, I have my pens and things. And I'm laughing right now because I'm enjoying my drink and my food and my things, right? I'm enjoying that. Like, really? Can I figure you out? It's not possible. No. We're very limited with our understanding, that's right. But Solomon, who is wise, arrives at the end of chapter 8. He tells the limit of wisdom is what? God. God himself limits the wisdom. He shares with us, we learn something wonderful. If he doesn't share with us, we're the same as a pea-brain person because we can't understand his infinite things that he's created in the world under the sun. Now, I want to back up to verse 9 because Evro noticed when I gave you the reading this morning, I had parentheses with 9, okay? And why I want to back up to verse 9 is because last week time ran out. And so I saw one thing I needed to add and share with you about verse 9. Okay, so back up to verse 9 in chapter 8. It says, all this, if I finish seeing, applied my heart to every work that is done under the sun. There is a time period where one man ruleth over another through his own purpose. Okay. Give me a minute to read again. Okay. Recently, verses 10 through 17, we see God is involved with that discussion. Because what? We see that God, Solomon, he blames God, you don't judge fast enough. Because of that, you, God, are encouraging sin. So he's struggling with God. Same as Job. You remember how he argues with God? Same idea, okay? This is not sinful, but it is just, I don't understand you. At the end, Solomon recognized, I can't understand you because you're God. I can't understand you because my mind is limited, your mind is eternal, okay? He understands that in verse 17. So he is honoring God. It's not a wrong communication with God. But sometimes people who read chapter 8 think, because verses 10 through 17 applies with this discussion with God, then we back up to verses 1 through 9, and we think this applies with God also. And I want to explain with you that I think this is wrong teaching. Okay? Verses 1 through 8, we talk about a person who controls over another person for his own hurt. Okay, so you remember we talked about the word dictator, like Hitler, controller, okay? That was to his own hurt. If you remember from history, Hitler was a half-Jewish person, but he killed his own people to his own hurt. Okay, that's weird. It doesn't understand. It's not common sense. Something is wrong there. Hitler told that all people with blonde and blue eyes were the pure people. But Hitler himself had brown hair and brown eyes, right? You don't understand that, okay? He's killing his own people again to his own hurt, right? It's not common sense. Something is wrong there. Now, sometimes people read verses 10 through 17, they think, okay, God himself is discussing with Solomon. Therefore, back up, verses 1 through 9 applies also with God that himself is the same as a king who controls his people to their own hurt. So, for example, because God created man like as a robot, command, give list of requirements, now God sees this robot who is out of control because it was wrong teaching for him, and that messes up. Secondly, the reason why I disagree with that doctrine. First, God doesn't control people. Secondly, because God does not work His will to hurt other people. How do we know? Because Romans chapter 8, verse 28 tells that God will work all things to who love God for what? For good, for His glory. That's right. So God, in His progression through time period and time period and time period, never works for your hurt. His plans are for your benefit. So I disagree that verses 1 through 8 applies with God as the king of the world. I believe that we're talking about an earthly king who is no good in verses 1 through 8. Right, God's loving kingdom. But remember, Solomon knows evil kings in the world. He has married some kings' daughters from Egypt, from different countries. So he knows there are evil kings. So when he has analyzed and searched for wisdom and the limits of that, I'm sure he is borrowing from Egypt. He looks at that, okay, study that. He borrows from Syria, and he studies that. He sees these different places, and he compares and says, wow, wisdom is very, very limited. It's no good. But be careful, because some people think, because the book of Proverbs, you remember, talks about wisdom related with God's kind of wisdom. Solomon wrote that book. Then they borrow wisdom and they think God's kind of wisdom is also limited here in Ecclesiastes chapter 8. But if you remember, starting with chapter 1, Ecclesiastes, up until now, we're talking separate from God, without God. We've not yet included God up until the end of chapter 8. Just recently, verse 17, He's going to show up. And chapter 9 through 12, as we close the book, we're going to see this change which is happening with the view. Any questions for today's preaching? Any? That verse, right, from Jeremiah, we see that God has plans for you for good and not plans for you for evil. And that is communicating with Israel long ago, telling His promised people, His covenant people, that my design of punishment is really designed to help you repent, come back to the Lord. Same with children. When we spank and we punish children, our design is not to hurt them, no, but to go ahead and draw them back to the parent, to draw them back to the Lord. And so when we finish the punishment, now it's time to sit down and to comfort and tell the person, okay, the relationship is here, it's fixed because you repent, you stop the sinning, you stop breaking that. Okay. Yes, generally you're right, because God's will is for good, because God, He views the end. Now, some people, it tells, hurt themselves because of bad choices. But also you have to remember that Solomon has struggled about the idea of the innocent person who is hurt as well. Okay? So now understand, we have God's purpose and plan. Okay? God planned for Jesus Christ to be crucified, right? Is that good for Jesus Christ? In the future, it's good because Jesus Christ has a bride who is bought with blood, right? But that time period, for 3 hours on the cross, when it's dark, when it's hurting, when he can't breathe, is it good for him? No, it's bad for him, right? So there are limited time periods that God gives suffering to you and I, the same as Jesus Christ. With His design, what? Future over here, glorification. Okay? Same idea. A mother, pregnant now, the time period of the birth, the pain, right? Good? No. But when God's Word tells me that when she finished boring the baby, she looks at the face and she forgets the pain. Okay? So the good here is through the suffering. Without the suffering, there's no baby that's born. Right? Very good. Any more questions, feedback? Just information about this week. Let me back up. Remember, Tuesday night we have Fog Bible Study, Tuesday night time 6:30. Secondly, remember we've advertised that Gary will be coming to Fog on Tuesday, July 30th over there. Okay, so July 30th. I will not be here, but I've told Gary that someone can meet him and lead him over there. If you remember, I'll be traveling at that time period. Pastor Burns will be here. And so recently I emailed him about his schedule as well. So Joni's phone number was given to Pastor Gary before you gave that, right, when you met him? But he told me he had yours somehow. Maybe not. I better check with him. Is there a right phone number on the card? Okay, good. He told me he had your number, so he told me if he is arriving late here at the church on Tuesday night, he's going to call. He didn't want to call me in New York. Very good. So if you know at that time period you're going to be traveling or something, just give that responsibility to the person to be a contact point. All right. Let's close it. Father in heaven, we thank you for the opportunity to gather together here. Thank you for your word. Thank you for teaching us about the limits related with wisdom. Help us to know your kind of wisdom and not man's fleshly wisdom. Help us also as we continue to fellowship today that your word will not only be preached, but it also will be applied in the individual lives of people. In Jesus' name.